Hello and welcome to 11FS Spotlight. My name is David Brear. In this show, we shine a bit of a spotlight on the best and brightest in the tech and financial services industry to try and understand what is it that gets them going, growing, and where they really think the future of the industry will be going. On today's Spotlight, I'm delighted to be joined by Irina Chuchkina, who I really hope I haven't murdered your pronunciation. She's nodding. I've nailed it. Brilliant. Who is the CMO over at Thunes. How's it going, Irina? Thank you very much for joining us and spending the time today. I'd love to learn a lot more about your background, your career, and everything that's got us there. But welcome to the show.
Oh, well, thank you very much, first of all, David. I'm very excited about, everything that 11FS is doing. So I'm very, very, very pleased to be on the show today.
Very cool. And what we're going to be doing, Irina, as we said, we're going to unpack a little bit about your career and what's got you to this point in terms of your role, your CMO role, and actually more broadly what you guys are doing at Thunes in terms of payment habits of Gen Z and developed and emerging countries, because it's a topic that's just exploding, isn't it? And actually the capabilities, the expectations of Gen Z particularly being very different from what's happened in prior times. So maybe if we start off though with a little bit about Thunes. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you guys do? And then CMO is a kind of a bit of a catch-all of so many different things, isn't it? Particularly in a sort of a scale-up or startup. So start us with, what do you guys do?
All right, sure, of course. So Thunes is a B2B fintech company headquartered in Singapore, but global in nature. What we do is we build the payments infrastructure that actually works across continents. So as we know, in the UK specifically, and in Europe and some developed markets, there is a pretty robust payment infrastructure that already connects a lot of the countries and is able to operate in real time. However, that is not necessarily the case in some of the emerging markets. And by emerging markets, I don't just talk about like really exotic destinations. I'm talking about sometimes connecting with Brazil and India and Indonesia. There are some local payment networks, but there is really this problem that I'm sure you've heard a lot about: interoperability and connectivity. So basically what we're trying to do and what we're trying to build is the payment infrastructure that actually brings up all of those emerging markets into the global economy. So that's the challenge that we have and that we're solving. We've built this ecosystem of about 130 different, that touches about 130 different countries. And I think how it's relevant specifically in the context of today's conversation is that in the European and developed countries, what you typically are seeing is that people have very high penetration of, I guess the landscape is seeing very high penetration of banking services, while in the emerging markets, it's the mobile wallets that typically are really leading and dominating the market. So one of the latest data points that I was able to find is that roughly there's about 2.8 billion mobile wallets around the world, and by 2025 there will be more than half of the world's population would actually have access to or will be using mobile wallets. So now thinking about traditional correspondent banking infrastructure that is not really built with the mobile wallets in mind. It doesn't connect to them, they don't speak to each other, and really it can take days for you to, when you send a transaction into say Indonesia, for instance, it's a really long process. So now I guess the power of modern technology is to bring it all together and make it work in a, hopefully, I really hate the word seamless, but it is indeed the word that we're trying to use.
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing point in time really to be doing this as well, because we talk a lot about the sort of advent of digital, the fundamental fabric of financial services really changing, and payments really are one of the most fundamental foundation layers of what good financial services really is, isn't it? And to your point, if you cannot move money instantaneously, well, actually you can't really benefit from what digital can really bring. As you say, I think we've been a little bit spoilt in the UK. And like you say, just for a global context, this isn't just about, as you say, developing nations. I mean, the US payment systems is as archaic as any in the world, isn't there? But innovations kind of grow around those things to a certain degree. But tell us a little bit more about your role then, and we'll come back to the company in a second. But CMO, I mean, I've different things, for different organizations, and you always sort of make it what it means in that sense. But what does it encompass? What do you do on a day-to-day basis, I guess?
Right. Well, as you've correctly pointed, CMO can mean a lot of different things. So I am the chief marketing officer. I head up a few different streams. One of them is building global brand for Tunes and making sure that we put it on the map. And I think that's one of the reasons why I've actually joined the company about 9 months ago, because I thought that Tunes is a company whose voice has deserves to be so much stronger and whose vision is so powerful and whose technology and products are actually much more robust than the presence and the visibility that it has in the market. So I'm here because I want to build that voice and to build that awareness. So that's, I guess, one of the roles that I get to play, in addition to all of the kind of the revenue generation or lead generation aspects of the job. Well, marketing is an art and science. And I think art comes from the fact that you try to be a really good and genuine storyteller on behalf of the company, help it to surface some of those gold nuggets and the precious, the precious messages that have to be heard and must be delivered. And then the second part of it is making sure that you also use the marketing technology. So I'm sure you're excited about the use of technology in general. So I'm also equally excited, not just about fintech, but also how technology can enable and empower that delivery of that message to the relevant audience, to people that need to hear it. So that's what I try to do: balance a few of those balls, arts and science of the marketing mix, find the right channels, identify the right audiences, and it's an exciting space to be also with all of the things that are happening in fintech.
Definitely. And tell us a little bit more about your background then. How did you get to this role? Because, I mean, it's an interesting one, as I sort of say. I mean, my background isn't marketing at all, but I think if you gravitate towards storytelling, that, as you say, the message sort of sells itself, but actually the ability to really connect with humans in terms of what you do and what you believe. As a company, 11FS, we talk very little about actually what we do. We talk incredibly large amounts, as many people will attest to, about what we believe in the industry. And actually, with a mission like connecting the payment, interoperability from payment rails perspective, that's a vision that changes the industry in that sense. So, you've got a great narrative in it to get out there, but connecting with humans is always difficult, isn't it?
It totally is. I totally agree with you. So, how I came to this and what my background is, I have actually been a very enthusiastic member of the payments and fintech community. I've generally spent about 17 years on the different intersections of financial services tech, consumer tech, as well as B2B tech and fintech. I've spent about 7 years at Visa. I spent about 2.5 years at Grab, which is Southeast Asian's ride-hailing super app. And then I've also spent a couple of years at Rapid, which is another rapidly growing payment organization. So now I'm at Tunes. And to your point, I actually wanted to almost disagree. I actually think that 11FS is doing marketing day in and day out by precisely telling all of those stories that you believe should be told, and by bringing in all of those insights. I think that generally, probably bad marketing is when you just do self-promotion. Good marketing is when you actually try to connect and to share genuinely and passionately the things that you believe are relevant for people around you, not necessarily even if they are directly related to your services or the products that you share. So I think well, I mean, some people cynically might be saying that people buy from a human, so it's just a sales strategy. There might be some aspects of it, but generally, I think that the power of good marketing is not just in putting the ads in the right place. The truly good marketing is about creating experiences, in putting the right communities together. And what I believe the best thing and one of the most inspiring things about 11FS is actually the power of the community that you've created and the power of the content that you're putting out there that helps all of us to get better. So
it's interesting, isn't it?
To your team.
Well, I'm sure Mariette, our CMO, will take the pat on the back, and I agree with you. It's from our perspective, doing things. Common wisdom in startups is do things that don't scale. But actually, I think from a communication perspective, particularly in a digital age, you can do things that scale phenomenally. Rather than having 10 conversations and 10 coffees, you can have one that hundreds of thousands of people engage with, and that changes the dynamic of actually building authenticity, I think, in that sense, which is interesting. How have you found, and we're going to go off piste here slightly, but it's interesting, so I'm going to stick with it. The idea of, I mean, if you've worked in B2C and B2B, the sort of techniques and the approaches for doing that when you're talking about, mass market and accessing it versus, B2B niches in that sense, in terms of where you're going. How have you found that difference in moments in your career?
I think that has been that change and shift between B2B and B2C has probably been the most stark, I think the most different, difficult to make, generally switching sides, and because generally the processes. Okay, sorry. If I think about all the industries that I've touched on or that I worked with, I think there is so many commonalities generally. Even within the fintech space, there's like obviously quite a lot of different verticals, but like there are certain aspects that seem to be there are certain patterns that repeat themselves. However, when you change from B2B to B2C and vice versa, I feel like that is probably a very, very drastic, where the biggest, the most drastic change happens. Um, in a few different levels, in the way conversations are handled and how manual things are versus how data driven. So, in my B2C experience, for instance, we could rely a lot on the data points that Grab, in that context, Grab was able to pick up how many touch points, how many daily interactions, how much time do they spend on the platform, a lot of those things. And there was, we could see where they're going. We could see maybe some other patterns that like you could figure out different segments of users based on their behavior. And I think that power of data in the large consumer tech is something that is really exciting and that can enable actually quite a lot of the financial services, for instance. While in the case of the B2B, generally, I think it feels like everything is changing. The process, the sales process is changing. The way account management and the business operations are built. It's typically a little bit more human focused as opposed to tech focused, with maybe some exceptions. So when we're talking about enterprise SaaS like platforms, that's where they still have access to quite a bit of data, but there's still some amount of that human interaction that they were trying to build. I feel like that was probably biggest difference.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? There's so many overlapping elements in that sense, but in many other guises, like you say, there's very different tools and techniques to access those markets, isn't there? I mean, one market or one community to talk about particularly is obviously, with what you do from a payments perspective, the changes that I expect from different generations. And I'm aware that you guys have spent a lot of time kind of really looking at some of the work that actually, particularly in Gen Z's sense. I mean, I remember very vividly, I mean, everybody was scared of millennials a minute ago, but Gen Z is where everybody's worried about now, which is, and with good cause, because the ways in which they're experiencing financial services or engaging with financial services is changing really significantly. But I've seen you're really planning with regards to achieving sort of growth and success past just where we're seeing 2030 getting to, when this market really sort of comes to maturity. But people are really trying to understand about how, well, living, shopping, financial habits of Gen Z. You guys have done some work into this. Tell us a little bit more about it, and what have you found out?
Okay, sure, of course. So Gen Z, so just to recap for those people who may have somehow missed the memo, the description. Gen Z are people that are born somewhere between 1997 and to 2012. So the oldest ones roughly are about 24, 25 years old, and the youngest ones are as young as 10-ish, roughly. So the generation is quite broad, and I have my oldest daughter. She's a Gen Z, and she's very, very different from me, obviously. An interesting and a very important thing to remember is that we typically sort of tend to, in my age group, we don't take them very seriously. I think generally that's a common pattern. Like, we are parents, they are kids. They're still sort of like, they are a little bit crazy, a little bit wild. But I think the reason, what might also, like an interesting data point that might give you an extra reason to think twice and to probably challenge yourself, is that this group is the largest generation in the world right now. There's about 2.5 billion people that are considered or called Generation Z or Zoomers. 2.5 is a lot. Again, like this, what is that? Roughly about like more than a quarter of the global population are Gen Zs. So now think about like why is it important? 24 year old is basically the group that is already making quite a lot of and quite substantial impact into the daily business and revenue and for revenue kind of streams for quite a lot of the companies, not just the social media, but actually quite a lot of the e-commerce companies, marketplaces, and neobanks for that matter. Also, some of the new brands, kind of the incumbents, if I may say so. So we need to start looking into what they care about. So what we did is once we realized that, we thought that we don't understand them well enough. We have some assumptions. We wanted to challenge those assumptions. So we decided to run a survey in 13 different markets around the world. And by how we selected the markets, the countries, is we wanted to have a little bit of a comparison between the emerging markets. So we took US and UK as the base. And then we took 11 emerging markets. 11 emerging markets were picked by the size of the overall size of the population. So we took like India, Brazil, Mexico, Indonesia, some of the really large countries around the world, as well as also the penetration of the social media and the kind of the adoption rates of the social media. And we asked them two things. We asked them a few questions about their social media patterns and how social media are impacting or their daily decisions. And we realized that, well, obviously one of the insights is that basically, in a nutshell, social media really determine how they spend their money and where they spend their money. They make a lot of decisions based on what they see on the Instagram or TikTok. TikTok made me buy it. Also, so there's a whole bunch of the hashtags. I'm sure even the millennial generation sometimes is influenced, but the Zoomers are influenced more than anyone. The second bucket of questions that we asked was about their payment patterns and what are their relations with money. And again, this has been also addressed by some other companies and some other studies, but I think we probably looked into a slightly different mix of countries also. And what we realized there is that, for instance, well, quite a lot of them don't have a bank account, and they don't have a bank account. About 62% overall, on an average, are the people that don't have any bank account at all. But it doesn't even look like they would want to. They don't seem to be very excited about, those traditional channels in general. They're really kind of, they lack enthusiasm that is related to traditional financial products. Some are a little bit more, wherever Apple Pay or Google Pay are present, they do have some ground with these groups. So in the US, for instance, Apple Pays, or in the UK, they would be quite rather popular. But mobile apps in general seem to have a much stronger interest and level of excitement from an adoption rate from this perspective. And obviously, the further we go into the emerging economies, the more of those local brands do we see. So, for instance, well, M-Pesa in Kenya is a kind of a common brand that is very commonly kind of referenced. But there are some Paytm in India, I'm sure you probably are familiar as well, is a very, very big and very popular, probably the most popular payment method in the country. And then there are some that like Gcash in the Philippines, Bcash in Bangladesh. There are some wallets that don't have the same amount of visibility in the Western markets. And coming back to my point, like they're not part of the global payments ecosystem. Well, they are, but it's done selectively. It's done sometimes not by all of those platforms. So we wanted to understand also how would that inform our strategy. So these are just some of the insights. An interesting last insight that I think perhaps I'd like to share with you is that as much as we'd like to think that Gen Z will become a cashless generation, they don't seem to be aligned with that vision at all. So cash for them is not dead, at least not yet dead. Even in the UK and the US, there's a significant portion of people, of Zoomers, that like using cash on a daily basis, and they use it roughly, I think in the UK, there's about 16% of the Zoomers that use it almost daily.
Wow.
It happens for different reasons. Some people just, I don't know, like in their canteen, they still don't have the POS terminals, or maybe there's like lack of acceptance. But I'm not seeing, personally, the way I interpret the data is I'm not seeing that cash is going to disappear completely. We like that big futuristic statement, but I think doesn't seem to have to gain grounds. Some of them, they are unlikely. It's digitalizing, but it still will continue to. Even my daughter confirmed that. It's like, yeah, I still want a little bit of my like little whatever cash file. It's more tangible, and they like the tangibility as much as they like their mobile apps as well.
It's interesting, isn't it? Those extremes. In one instance, we're seeing brands that people can affiliate with that actually, the Apples, the Googles, as you say, the sort of almost retail brands that people will affiliate with and therefore use their service. And at that end, probably beyond that end, we're seeing the usage and adoption of cryptocurrency as an asset of some description in that sense, but at the same time some traditional values that are there as well with regards to sort of the storage of money. I mean, how are you sort of seeing? I mean, I scraped the millennial bucket just, I mean, I think my mum just made that cutoff so I can claim millennial status type thing. But how are you seeing the change there then with regards to the millennial group and Gen Z? Is that idea? Am I going to really fall out with my son who's 10 now about like the usage of money and the art? Because I guess money is such an ethereal thing, isn't it? And the usage of money is such a emotive thing in that sense that I guess you would traditionally think, my mum and dad passed on values and I'll pass on values, and you think those things would sort of be pervasive through generations to a certain degree. But I guess increasingly children are shaped more by outside of the house than they are inside of the house, and particularly with a completely interconnected world, right? So social media, the internet, it's got a lot to answer to, isn't it?
Yes, for sure. And in fact, I think that was one of the questions that we asked: what influences their decision patterns and decision making? And well, who influences it? And almost no country really chose parents, and even friends, unfortunately, don't seem to be an influencing factor. In fact, people do trust a lot indeed to social media. Reviews. So they like to read other people's reviews. They like to read comments and basically what do people say. And so, but we've looked at the parents' choice and I think some other reasons why people would choose something. They also trust and they like good user experience, which is unsurprising. And generally, they it's like the likability of the brand. If they like the brand, they imply that it's a trusted and kind of they have it's trusted and secure solution. So by liking the brand, they're more likely to use it a lot more, which I guess is an extra reason for companies of the new age, of the new generation, or those that are looking to Gen Zs to build presence in TikTok and make sure that they're in the right channels and
Yeah.
on YouTube as well. Actually, quite a lot of them. YouTube continues to be a very, very popular communication, well, a social media medium.
Well,
So
definitely based on my 8-year-olds and my 10-year-olds internet usage, then YouTube is well and truly at the top of that pile when it comes to everything. And I mean that's interesting to that point, though. I guess back to going full circle on the conversation, building authenticity, building trust with people through marketing. Actually, the transparency in an internet age is you are what you do, right? It's not what you say you do. It's not your, my marketing statement of, we're a brilliant company and we're here for you. Well, actually, if all the reviews say otherwise, then actually the reality of that situation when it comes to what consumers really see, that's the critical piece, isn't it? So pleasing your customers, getting your customers to be your biggest advocates in a B2B world is the critical thing. B2B as well, right? If B2B companies, everybody says bad things about an organization, that's not going to work out very well. So I mean, how do you see those companies needing to adopt to that? Because I guess this is something that large traditional financial services vendors have not been very good at doing with regards to managing. They say the reality is the gap between your marketing and what you actually do, right? And if that gap's too big, then your comments are going to be really, really bad. If they're really positive, then actually you do what you say you'll do, right?
totally. And I think, well, my response to that would be to try to build two channels or two practices. One is a voice of the customer. And by voice of the customer, I mean just creating or trying to establish those ongoing feedback loops and mechanisms, whether it's done via, again, some digital as well technologies and solutions, NPS score, and hopefully a deeper, at least one level deeper than that. Why do people choose you? So understanding really how do customers in their enterprise software interact with you. And then voice of the customer is one of them. And then the second one is actually, so remember I was making a reference to kind of building the voice of company, of Thunes, a company that I work with. I think that voice is built through the voice of the people that work with that company and helping them to it will probably be a choir rather than a voice, just from the point of view of, everyone singing very different tunes and songs, and the narrative, the messages would be very different. But I think eventually helping people to discover, well, first of all, I don't know, their things that they are passionate or connected the most within the technology, and helping them to externalize it or find a way to share it with the world. I think that is an interesting way, or probably something that I'm trying to encourage more people within any organization. So employee advocacy and customer advocacy, for that matter.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point that, and actually, I mean, people often forget, I guess, marketing is the voice to future employees as well as customers, and actually the transparency in the work environment and everything that goes with that is as important, really. You are really just what your employees do every day. Therefore, being really transparent about how those things work is really critical. So, I mean, where can people get their hands on this? Because I'm like I say, I said to you before we started this, I've got a long train trip after this chat we've got. So, where can I get hold of this report?
Oh, the report is currently published on thunes.com, which is our website. So you go into the e-resources section, and then you will be able to download it. So that's on the report itself. That's where you also, in thunes.com, is where you can read a little bit more about the company if you're interested to learn more about it. Or if you don't like that option, interacting with a lifeless machine, then you can reach out to me on LinkedIn always, and I'm happy to give you a quick overview, or just take any other questions. I'm very, again, like as a very enthusiastic member of the fintech community, I would be really looking forward to continue to build my network. It sounds like almost like the end, the closing line of the show.
I know that really should have been, shouldn't it? But there's definitely other things that I want to talk to you about, so we'll keep you going for a second. But what's next for the company? Because obviously, I mean, that is a huge target. That's a big strategy. Interoperability for payments across all of those regions that you're looking at covering. That's a big thing. But equally, payments isn't just about payments anymore. It's about all of the services that wrap around payments, and really what it does much higher up in the stack in that sense. So what's next for the company?
So before I answer that question, I'll tell you what's been happening in the last maybe 12 months or so. And generally, Thunes has started with a company that helps people to pay, and companies. So we started with the payouts business. What happened about 10 months ago, we've acquired a company that also helps to accept payments online, so like a checkout e-commerce experience. The company was called Limonetique. It was a French-based collections business, and now we've fully folded. So now we support both streams, both with the core vision of connecting developed countries with emergent ones. And the mobile wallets that I was referencing are the ones that we are currently offering on the platform. Now, another acquisition, or not an acquisition, we've acquired a majority stake in an AML and compliance fintech called Tukitaki. So we're starting to add more pieces to this platform, the global payments platform, that helps to provide more holistic and more kind of comprehensive list of payment services that can help to solve the needs for companies that want to operate globally. And that IML and compliance aspect is quite important, because it helps to not just process transactions on board customers, but like that is it's important for us to make sure that we do it in a way that is sustainable, that is eliminating the risks. And by eliminating the risks, it also shaves down the costs. So the cost
Definitely.
of payment operations globally is something that we're trying to address every single day of our lives. What's
It's
ahead?
interesting, isn't it? In that sense, I mean, we had Patrick Collinson on from Stripe on the podcast not so long ago, and actually he said when you solve a problem for a customer, inevitably it raises other problems, and actually,
Yes.
by solving that root payments capability, well, AML from a global perspective becomes the next problem, doesn't it? Because your endpoints are really where you need to start thinking about, AML is often solved at a very local level, but thinking about it in all of those different jurisdictions with all of those different setups is a big task. But that's a nice thing, though, right? You solve one problem, the next whack-a-mole problem pops up, and you can continue to solve these things because as much as payments, I mean, payments is a massive beachhead, but there's so much opportunity wrapped around that, isn't there?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I think, as you were mentioning in the beginning, it actually is connected to pretty much every single aspect of commerce. Well, it's not just about even financial services. It's about like everyone who needs to pay and get paid would be touching the payments in a variety of different forms. So it's a far that will continue to be our core area of expert, well, and focus and expertise. Our product roadmap will continue to enhance the services. Our network team is already very busy trying to build new countries. So there's about 195 or about 200 roughly countries around the world. We are currently present at about 130, so still about 60, 65-ish to cover. But from Australia and Argentina to Zambia, we already have a pretty wide coverage, something that is not very common. And I think we're again like kind of thinking about all of those multitude of the payment channels and methods and form factors and technologies, bringing them under the same hood is something that Thunes is uniquely focused on.
Fantastic. We'll definitely, as those things transpire and as you go from success to success, we'll definitely get you back on to talk about that in more detail. We always like to leave off with a more of a personal question, which is always a bit shocking to people if I say a personal question, and I think it's going to get all deep and meaningful. But I mean, what would be the advice you'd give yourself if you were kind of starting out again? And this can be related to fintech, or it could be from a career perspective in terms of advice. But actually, there's a lot of people who tune into this who might be at the beginning of their careers, and actually these things look so. I always say to people, everybody's career looks so strategic when you plot the story of it later on down the line. But there's a lot of luck and there's a lot of judgment in there in certain instances. So, what advice would you give to yourself or to your younger self or to a younger person watching this, just really starting out in their career?
Always look for the things that really truly make you happy. I think I am one of those people that have not never worked almost like in any day in my life because I'm just seriously and very genuinely really excited about the things that I'm doing, whether it's marketing and, well, actually in this case, it's marketing and fintech. And high growth startups is something that gets me excited, but I'm also trying to stay curious and trying to stay connected with a whole bunch of the topics and the kind of in the startup world. I'm trying to stay curious. I'm trying to stay curious with and kind of keep learning about the things that make me tick. And not everything makes everyone tick. So I just making sure that you're aware about the things that make you tick. I think is just it's probably the interesting insight. What has been the most interesting response to that question, David, so far?
Yeah,
Do you remember
all
what's been
sorts of things, and it's interesting to your point. I think you're absolutely spot on when you say what makes you tick, what's your passion, because I think a lot of people get into their careers looking for fame or glory, or
money?
money, whatever it is. But
Fame or
most of those
fortune?
things are outcomes, aren't they? They're not the things that you do every day. And I completely subscribe to what you're saying. If you get a job that you love, that means you get out of bed happy to be doing that every day. That's just the best thing in the entirety of the world, isn't it? And it sounds like you're blessed with that. I definitely am in that sense. I love what I do, and that's fantastic that we get to do that, isn't it? Isn't it a great time to be working in financial services? Hey.
It is a great time. I'm just hoping that the markets will also recover and we'll start seeing a little bit of that upside again. Like
Definitely. Well, there's within any crisis, there's always opportunity in that sense, and there's always problems that people need solving for sure. And but congratulations with your career, congratulations with the success of the company. We'll definitely have you back on to talk about it in more detail. Sadly, we are running out of time, so we are going to have to wrap up. But and coming to the end of the show, thank you so much, Irina. Again, where can people find out a little bit more if you want to give the hit for the research report and also for you personally on LinkedIn again?
Oh, for sure. So it's tunes.com for the report itself. And I'm going to send the team the link so that they can possibly include it into the description of the YouTube video. And me personally, LinkedIn is indeed the best way to find me. So I think there's not many arenas at Tunes. And Tunes is spelled, sorry, is Thunes. And you, yeah, just add me there. Let's connect. And in fact, I will be spending more time in the UK. So if anyone wants to connect to people that are a little bit new to the market, I would be very happy to build my new network there.
Fantastic. All right, guys. Well, that's all the time we have for you this week, unfortunately. Make sure you follow 11FS on pretty much every social media channel at this stage: LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, wherever you want to connect with us. There's cool stuff happening. If you did enjoy this show, then subscribe to the 11FS YouTube channel as well, where you can catch up on all of the other previous episodes as well. Have a great week, everybody. It's going to be a bit of a scorcher, I think, in London, which is good. Give it 15 seconds. We'll all be complaining it's too hot, won't we? All right, everybody. Thanks very much. Goodbye.
Thank you for having me. Bye.